So we're going to look at dressing a dog's forelimb today, which is not really designed to be dressed particularly effectively. We get lots of problems with dressings due to the shape of the limb, letting the dressing slide off. We've also got various knobbles and various misshapen parts. And it's got quite complex anatomy that we need to take into account when we're trying to get a dressing to stay on. So in light of that, I thought I'd show you what I do in order to try and get over that. So you'll need to have a dog with a limb to dress, a pair of gloves, then some stockinette, which is available in lots of different sizes just to make it look nice and tidy, a pair of scissors, and we'll need a bit of cotton wool, a swab, and some micropore tape. This is quite nice, it's quite breathable tape, it's easy to tear but it is quite strong. We'll need a couple of wooden tongue depressors, then we'll need some secondary dressing layers, so some padded dressing, there's lots of different brands of this, some conforming bandage, and then last but not least, this is quite a nice casting material to make a customised splint, and a bowl of warm water, and plus an assistant with a pair of gloves. The stockinette that we can get well above and well below where we want to be, so I think I'll cut it off around about here. Definitely go longer than shorter. It's much easier to cut more off than it is to add more on. So we'll just put that up out the way to start with. This isn't essential, but it helps everything to look quite nice at the end of it and keeps everything nice and tidy once the dog's gone home. You can see we've already got an adhesive primary dressing on here. This dog had a pancarpal arthrodesis yesterday. Whatever wounds are there, so not every dog's going to have a wound, so I thought I'd just leave that on nice and tidy now. But whatever your primary dressing is, it's normally a good idea to have that in place. So next up, we're going to protect this dew claw. This is a very common place to get problems. If we just put a dressing on over here, it's very common to get a pressure sore appearing underneath. So I'll just fold over a swab, pop that underneath around there. So now when that swab gets pressed on, at least the skin is going to be protected underneath that area. And it can help just to use a small bit of tape. So it's not very tight, but just a small bit of tape on around just to hold that in place whilst we're doing the rest of our dressing. So that's one thing nicely in place. Next, we're going to put the stirrups on. These I think are probably the most important part of this dressing, because these are going to be what's going to stop it from sliding off. So these, I use them laterally and medially. I just stick them down onto the skin or the dressing, so they come nicely down and past the end of the toes. I'll put one on both sides, and that can go over the dew claw just to keep it in place. And then these can get themselves all stuck up to each other or to anything else, so that's where these tongue depressors come in. I just lay them both on and then stick the second stirrup down onto there, just to keep them nice and tidy so we can come back to them a bit later. Next, I'm going to put a little bit of stuff between the toes and between the pads. This, because the end of the dressing is going to be open, these can often fall out, but I put them in to start with, and I think they do help at just trying to stop some of that skin from rubbing and from getting too sweaty. But as I say, with an open-ended dressing, as we'll see, these do often fall out. But I guess in the areas they fall out, they're the areas which are quite well aerated, so maybe that doesn't cause too much of a problem. But interdigital dermatitis is a problem with these cases when they're dressed for a while, and this is hopefully something. Just get something around the back in front of that metacarpal pad, put a couple of pieces in there. It's something we can do to try and reduce the complications of these bandages, and as I say, dermatitis is quite a common one. So the next step is to look after this carpal pad, which is quite prominent, and imagine if you just put a dressing on here flat, this part's going to take all the pressure and it's very prone to getting a pressure sore and losing its surface, which is probably uncomfortable. So what we'll do is to make a donut to protect that, and it's quite a simple thing, just using some of this soft band, just wrap around a couple of fingers for a few layers, and then it's just a case of wrapping this around and through a few times just to create a nice little soft donut to protect that area. So here's a donut which can then sit nicely on here. and to be honest, it's normally easier to stick this on as well, just lightly. I say lightly just because I don't want to create a tourniquet effect with the adhesives, but it is helpful to have this stuck in place because there's quite a lot to think about with the dew claw, with this, with that, with everything, and you need all the help you can get, otherwise it gets a little bit fiddly. So there we go, we've got that nicely in place there. And then we can bring down, do you mind holding the top of this for me? We'll just bring the stockinette down over this. And a little bit more. Just checking that that dew claw is still supported. So everything is nicely in place for us to then start building a dressing on top of it. So the next thing to do is to just provide some secondary layer and add some supports to this bandage. It's also going to help to smooth over the contours a bit here because this still is quite proud and will be accepting a lot of compressive force from the bandage. So if we can just build up above and below that area, then that should help just to keep things nice and smooth and even. Coming up to near the elbow, because with a splinted dressing, the longer we have the splint in place, the more effective it can be. I might just put a little bit more on here, it's just still got a little bit of an indent around there, so I'll just fill that in. So this is quite a lot of dressing on here, but this still should help it to be quite a nice effective construct, because we're making a mechanical construct. You've got those scissors handy, please. Thank you. Do you want to put your finger on that for me for a second, please? Thank you. Oops. And we'll put the conforming layer on. I imagine this part will be able to speed up on the film, to be honest. So we're leaving the bottom part open so that the foot can breathe. This is just keeping everything nice and tidy and in place. You've got the scissors handy, please. Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll just use a little piece of that tape just to hold it in place. Okay. So the next part is going to be putting on the customised splint, and it is covered with some sort of chemical which hardens when it's been exposed to water, so definitely wear gloves for this part. I did try not wearing gloves on one occasion, and it takes about a week for your skin to wear off sufficiently for the chemical to go. You can't really get it off. This is the stuff. It's nice and pliable until it gets wet, and what we're going to do is to place, actually do you mind holding that up there? We're going to end up pre-measuring where our splint's going to go. And a Palmer caudal splint, which is going to be about this long. So that's where I've measured it to. You can put the leg down. Do you want to just hold that there? Oops. And what we'll do, if you can pull your hands down, so lay it horizontally, and we're going to make up a many-layered dressing. If you can take this top piece here, and then lower your hands, and we're just going to lay it down. And the reason we're laying it horizontally is if you do it vertically, if you hold it up vertically for me, then this piece with the weight on it stretches and it's not even. So if you just lay it down horizontally, lay it down nicely so there's no tension in the dressing material, then it will make a nice even dressing. And we need to make it about maybe 8 layers or something like that, maybe slightly more. We'll just keep going for a while, just until we have a nice dressing of the right length, where each layer is nice and evenly positioned. So we're up to probably about 6 or 7 now. We'll keep on going, do a couple more, and then there we go. I think that's probably enough. We'll just finish it off there like that. That's fine. And I'll cut this here. So cut that off just with a normal pair of scissors, and then we don't need this part again. Okay, so next up, we're just going to wet this fully, wring it out a little bit. So this is now going to start to cure, so we want to just place it down over the caudal palmar aspect of the limb, which just makes sure we're in the right kind of place, including the foot, and then we're going to use the conforming bandage to get that held nicely in place whilst it cures. Oops, sorry. And that's going to put a nice even conforming pressure on it, so we haven't got any creases or kinks, because they're going to be weak points or also points that might dig in. It comes all the way down the end of the foot. So that's nicely incorporated into that bandage now. And then ideally we're going to try not to touch that, just because otherwise we might cause an indent. Thank you. We might cause an indent in there, which might then cause a bit of a problem, so we'll just leave that to cure and harden, which takes maybe 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes or so, and it warms up quite nicely during that process. So that's nicely on the palmar side here. It comes all the way down so that when the dog's foot impacts the floor, this is the part that's going to take all the force. That force will then be transmitted up the splint and then through the dressing into the dog's leg up here, but without putting too much pressure on those points that we've already padded out in this region. So it's going to be a mechanical construct that takes the weight of the dog and transmits it down through the dressing, through the splint and into the floor, without putting too much strain on our repair or on the soft tissues that are vulnerable to pressure sores in this region. And that's already, I can feel that warming up and it's getting nice and firm now, so we'll just let that continue to firm. Right, the next bit is to make sure the stirrups are effective, so do you mind holding this bit up here for me? We'll just turn the stockingette around. We can see the toes at the end of the bandage, so you can see them, but they're nice and covered. We can get to them, air can get to them as well, so we can check the bandage. We'll also be able to tell if the bandage has slipped, because it will be obvious that the toes are deeper within it. So it's nice, a nice height, this bandage here, and we're just going to wrap around using the stockingette. I'm just going to wrap some tape around there to hold that nicely up in place, and that's keeping the end of our bandage nice and tidy. Next, where we've got these stirrups, we can peel those back. Oops. And then we want to just, under tension, we want to twist the stirrup and then applying some tension up. So we're already lifting the bandage up the leg slightly. We can then stick the stirrups up the leg, and the same on the other side. So we have the sticky surface of the stirrup here. We'll just twist it around, and then pulling up the leg, we can then stick that stirrup in place, and then we'll reinforce that with some more tape over the top so that we know that that stirrup shouldn't slip. Next, we can repeat that at the top. So there's no stirrups to do up here, but we can just stick this dressing down quite nicely. So that's in place. That stirrup's coming away slightly. I'll just put another layer in here. Now, one thing, it depends on the reason for doing the bandage. In this dog, we have got PCA, so we really want this part of the limb to avoid flexion or avoid having forces put on it. And you can make a much stiffer construct by wrapping layers of tape or rigid tape at the top and bottom of each of these limb segments either side of the joint. So we will put one more layer up here. It just means the limb is slightly more secure and the bandage is slightly less distensible in these areas, so it just keeps it a bit more secure. So that's what it looks like under the surface. That's not going anywhere, that bandage, and all the layers are quite nicely padded. So all that's left is to make it look pretty, well, ish. If you've got lots of time, then we can pimp these up quite nicely. You can always tell when the nursing team has got too much time in their hands if these get super pimped. So just go around, make sure that's covered. I don't add anything extra on the bottom, but this is the area the dog's going to be walking on, and so you can put different materials on the bottom to change the grip that the bandage will have, or to try and protect the bandage more, but I don't tend to bother, to be honest. I just get that nicely up around the top. So there we go. We've got quite a nice tidy dressing. We can get to the paws, get to the toes. They're breathing, but they're covered, so they're not going to swell. It's nice and secured in place. It comes up the right kind of distance. We might get some dermatitis here where it bends in. It's hard to avoid that. We can make the bandage shorter or angle it more, but we'll just see how that goes. That's not normally too much of a problem. I can get my fingers in. It's quite nice and comfortable around there. So hopefully that will do for the next week or so, and we'll change it in a week's time.